Hey guys, our devotion today is from the Old Testament Minor Prophets. We get to look at Zechariah today, chapter 9, verses 9 through 17, and Micah, chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, and look at some classic Christmas scriptures, prophecies about Christ. But before we get into that, I want to remind you today, let's be in prayer for John and Vicky Hall. I imagine that even if you're not extremely familiar with the books of Micah and Zechariah, that as you read these passages today, you probably were quite familiar with these particular passages because, yeah, they are Christmas passages. They're re-quoted in the New Testament, talking about Christ. They were prophesied between 500 and 700 years before Christ showed up, before he was even on the scene. The prophets Micah and Zechariah actually lived in two very different time periods. They were separated by about 200 years. Micah coming first and Zechariah later. Micah actually lived in the time when the Jewish people were about to go into captivity. Remember, God had been warning them again and again, if you do not turn back to me, I'm going to judge you using another nation. And their hearts turned away from God continually. The kings were disobedient, and God, we're seeing that last month when we read through First Kings. God eventually does judge them. He uses Assyria, and he uses the Babylonians to bring judgment on Israel and on Judah. He takes them into captivity for a significant amount of time. Well, Zechariah actually comes 200 years later. He prophesied after Israel had come out of captivity, after they had returned to their land. And, well, they had even begun to rebuild the temple. They had laid the foundations for the temple, but they hadn't been able to complete it yet. Part of the reason was that they lived under opposition from these other nations, and they were still actually under the power of the Persians during this time. And I think that's something that really stands out to me about both these scriptures today. Both of these prophecies talk about peace. I think about the fact that ever since the moment God brought Israel into the promised land, the promised land, it was his gift to them. It was his plan for them. It's what he wanted. It's their inheritance that he has for them. They never, from the very beginning, quite enjoyed it the way that God wanted them to. Constantly, they were under pressure from the nations around them. They were constantly being lured away to worship idols. And so they were facing judgment. They just never really experienced the promised land, the promises of God and what he wanted to give them. And I think that's what's so powerful about these passages. The Christmas passages that we see here, when they were delivered by these prophets, they were passages of hope, looking to the future, saying, man, things are terrible. Things are going to get worse. We're struggling. The other nations, these with false gods, they don't even have the one true God as their God, are ruling over us, humiliating us. But God says, I am coming. I'm going to deliver you, and I'm going to bring peace. And this is not just a peace for Israel. This is peace for them and the whole world. We look at the world today, we see the state of things. One thing that truly does seem impossible is that the world would be at peace, that people would be able to live at peace, that nations could live at peace, that people could be at peace with themselves, even within their own families. But the truth is the same today as it was then, that there really is only one that's going to bring peace, and that is the Messiah that Israel was waiting on. And unfortunately, most of them missed him and are still waiting on him, but he's come and he is bringing peace. Just like the message of the Messiah was a message of hope for these Jewish people, it's a message of hope for us today. The Messiah has come. He is ruling, and he will establish his kingdom, and there will be peace. And nothing else we can go out and offer the world today, no other means of bringing them peace, is going to equal up to that. Now, we can bring some peace temporarily, but we've seen it's just going to fall apart. Let's take that Christmas message out there today, because that's the only one true peace that is going to be everlasting. As much as Israel needed it then, we all need it. We all needed it then, and we all need it now, and we have to take that out to the world. I'm thankful for that message of peace today for myself. I know that Christ is going to bring everlasting peace. God bless you guys.